So what we're going to do in this video is set up our animation controller and do a little bit of scripting. If you recall from our last video, we went ahead and made these three states, animation states. So in order to control those states, our door actually needs a controller to go inside this inside of our animator component. So I'm going to right click and go to create. I'm just going to go down to animation controller. I'm going to name it door underscore CTRL. And with this guy selected, I'm going to drag door controller into our controller here. And I'm going to double click this and open it up. Let me go ahead and dock this below it so you can see it in action. What we want to do is we want to drag in our door idle, our door open, and our door close. So we've got our three states in there. Now when I press play, what you'll notice, let's go ahead and make sure that it's not on maximize. Our door is actually not doing anything. It's just sort of sitting there. It's idling. And that's because what's happening is it's going straight to our door idle component. If I right click here and I make a transition to door open, what'll happen is it'll go to door idle and it'll cycle through this, creating this arrow or this gateway into door open. So now when I press play, you'll notice that it went straight to door open and it stayed at door open. So I'm going to go ahead and hit escape, right click, make a transition to door close, right? Here's our open close, it should be door close. But I'm going to press play again. Goes to idle, goes to open, then goes to close. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like it where if my character walks up to it, it triggers the door opening. For that, I'm going to need to write a script that controls the parameter of this animation controller. So let's create a new parameter. I'm going to make it a Boolean, and what that means is I name this Boolean open, but when this is checked on, it'll open the door, and when it's checked off, it'll leave the door closed. So the way that parameters are invoked is if you click this arrow here, let's go ahead and go back to our inspector, you'll notice that it has a condition. This condition refers to this arrow here. So if I open this up, what it's saying is if this is open, if open, which is the parameter we made, is checked as true, it'll go to door open. That's from here. Now notice that it's not checked on. So if I press play, you'll notice that we're still stuck at idle because this condition is not marked as true. But if I check this on, notice that the door opens. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that this is marked as true. Let's go ahead and make another parameter, another Boolean, and we'll just call this close. And I'm going to uncheck this. And what we're going to say here is if this is this parameter, which is close, is true, then we'll close the door. Okay? So those are set up. Now we need a way to get back. And you know what? Maybe we'll work on that in the next video. So we'll go ahead and start working on scripting. So I'm going to go up to the highest form, which is our assets folder. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to call this scripts. And then within this folder, I'm going to create another folder called objects. And in here, I'm going to create a folder. And inside, or create a C# script called door script. And I give it the preface of script because in case I'd start doing a search for it, I look for door. If the icons aren't really showing properly, I know it's prefaced with script. So inside of Visual Studio, when we launch our script, you'll see that it gives us a very basic template. It gives us our class name, which is the same name as our file, and it gives us two functions. For this video, I'm not going to need the update function. I'm going to be using the start function. And you'll see here it says use this for initialization. So what that means is when I press play on my game, anything that I put in here, any code that I'll put in here will run at least once. And so what we want to do is we're going to create some very basic code so that we can look at A, accessing this component here, and then B, marking it so that this condition is true if we enter a trigger. So before we actually get into the scripting, we need to sort of set up our door a little bit. You'll notice right now, I'm going to go ahead and remove my box collider. Let's go ahead and remove this component. I'm going to remove this script. And so yours is probably going to look a lot like this. What we did in the last video, you'll remember on the left door, we added a box collider so we couldn't walk through it, and here's the right door. On our highest level, which is our door as itself, I'm going to go ahead and add component, and I'm going to go to physics, and I'm going to go ahead and add a box collider. And I'm going to expand this out a little bit. Let's kind of mess with our size. and then I'm going to make it a little bit longer so that it goes through both sides. And the reason for that is because I want to be able to walk in and out of our trigger and trigger this animation. So now that we have that, I also want to make sure this is a trigger so that when I walk into it, it triggers the door opening. So now that that's set up, let's do some very basic scripting that says as we enter this trigger, the door will open. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I need to do is I need to create a variable. So I'm going to make this public, just so you guys can see it. Public, and I'm giving it the name animator, and then I'm just going to give it the name anim. You give it whatever name you want. So if you remember before, a variable is a temporary storage place. And so what this variable is going to store is anything that has to do with the animator component. Now the thing is, I need to get this component off of my door. So the way that I do that is in my start, I'm just going to write anim equals get component, and let's go ahead and add these guys. Now the way that we can get this component is we need to tell Unity what component we're trying to get, and I want to get the animator component from my object. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S, and I'm going to start off by writing my first function. And so Unity has a built-in function called onTrigger enter. And this is one of my favorite built-in functions by Unity. And what it says is we're going to do something when we enter the trigger. Now we need a way to record the collision, because remember trigger is an option that's attached to the box collider. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to pass in a variable called collider, and collider is the data type, and I can name it other, or I can even name it player, or whatever we want. But for now, we'll just name it other. And then I'm going to use an if statement, and that if statement is just going to check if we're doing something. So if the other object, so I'm going to type in other, which is that variable, and I'm going to type, and I'm going to look for game object. So if our other game object has a tag of player, and again, this could be whatever tag you guys created, player, we're going to do something. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for on my animation component, animation dot set boolean. Notice that it's there. And this takes two parameters. I'm going to look for open, right? And I want to make sure that this is in quotes because it's a string, is true. So let's take a look at this one more time. So I'm going to snap this to the side of the screen here, and I'm going to bring this up over here. So what are we doing? If I enter the trigger that this script is attached to, which is this door, if I enter this, I'm going to set this Boolean value to true. All right? So let's grab our script and drop this on our door. Oops, let's make sure our door is selected. I'm going to drag and drop it onto our door. Oops, I did it twice. Let's remove that. Okay, so here it is. So now let's look at a couple things. One, look at, because it's public and we're assigning it here. Let me zoom out a little bit so you guys can see that. If I press play, notice that it dropped the animation in here. Now I'm going to walk up to the door, and let's watch what happens here. Notice that it checked it off as true. Now, notice that it's not looping or going back. So what we'll do in the next video is we'll script the rest of this, and we'll make it so that our transitions inside of here, so it transitions through this and then back again.